we're here to discuss the development of impact investing in Africa, I thought it might be useful to actually start with the definition of what we actually mean by the term. In 2010, we co-authored a report with JP Morgan, and our working definition of impact sourcing is actually listed here on the screen. Investments intended to create positive social impact beyond financial return. So it sounds very simple, but there's often a lot of confusion, so I'll highlight some of the key elements of this definition. So here we're talking about the investment of capital, which can take many forms, debt, equity, guarantees, for example. But at a minimum, impact investors expect to get their money back. And in some cases, they expect to get a market rate return. So this distinguishes impact investing from philanthropy, which is what we at the Rockefeller Foundation are very good at. Impact investments are also made with an explicit intent to generate a positive impact. It's not about doing less harm, which was the origins of the socially responsible investment movement in the US and Europe, but it's about creating positive impact. And it's also not about creating positive impact as an unintended consequence. So here we're focusing on intent. So as evidence of this intent, we look for things like a stated investment thesis that includes non-financial as well as financial returns, and whether the social and environmental performance of the investment is actually being measured and managed along with the financial performance. So this definition has actually provoked quite a bit of conversation, maybe a little bit of angst. So I'm going to return to this a little bit later, because as we've said, we want to make sure that this definition is relevant for what we experience here in Africa. And I think that in our conversation that we had yesterday with a small group of stakeholders, we've come up with something that will hopefully address that. So impact investing encompasses a diverse set of activities. It spans a range of geographies and a number of sectors. And so, as you saw in the definition, it also spans a number of asset classes, including equity and debt, cash deposits, and guarantees. Although we sometimes like to think of impact sourcing, impact investment, as an asset class in and of itself. As with traditional investments, an investor can take varying degrees of risk for varying levels of expected return. All impact investors, by definition, have the desire for both a financial return and a positive social environmental return. Different investors, though, may hold these differently in tension. For some investors, their priority is to create impact. We often call these impact-first investors. They may include foundations, like us, family offices, and others who are free not to choose market rate returns as a primary objective. For other investors, their first priority is to achieve a market rate of financial return. We often call these finance-first investors. They include pension funds, insurance companies, and other commercial institutions. These two groups sit along a continuum with a great deal of variation in between. So while it is diverse, impact investing does not include a number of important things. It does not include grants, including strategic philanthropy. We think grants are very important because that's what we do at the Rockefeller Foundation, and I'll come back to that. But that's not what we mean when we say impact investing. We're also not talking about mainstream capital markets. We believe that some mainstream capital investments generate positive social and environmental impacts, perhaps even significant ones, but without an explicit intention to do so, we actually don't consider them in the scope of impact investment. I'm going to come back to that issue of intent a little bit later. So why impact investing? Why is a private foundation like the Rockefeller Foundation focused on this space? I'm not sure how familiar you are with the Rockefeller Foundation, but we became known in the last century for work like building schools of public health, for training agronomists to deal with food security. There are scores of African PhDs on this continent and in the world who are supported by us, and we call them Rocky Docs. So this is what we've been known for in Africa. So people think it's often quite strange for a philanthropic organization to devote time and resources to something with investing in the title. But for us, the reason is pretty clear. In the last century, private charity was a substantial funder of social innovation. And we often assumed that government or other large charities would take successful innovation to scale. We now see that there's simply not enough philanthropic capital to do that. There are too many problems, social problems, environmental problems that we face across the globe. And there isn't enough charity to actually fund all the innovation that we need as well. And it certainly isn't enough to have the scale. In the US, for example, which has the single largest philanthropic sector in the world, the combined assets of all foundations last year came to about $700 billion. And about $45 billion of that was given out in the form of donations. That might sound like a lot, but because it includes Gates and other private charities as well. But it pales in comparison to the $2 to $3 trillion that experts think will be necessary to provide adequate, affordable housing for those who need it across the globe. In contrast, there are tens of trillions of dollars in global capital markets. So we saw a real opportunity. So we need to harness a portion of that funding, not to mention the creativity and reach of the private sector, if we're actually going to make a meaningful dent in the world's largest problems. And for us, the timing was right. We saw that there were also a number of organizations, a number of high net worth individuals who are now focused on impact. They wanted to line up their investment decisions with their values. So the timing was right for us to really focus on this space. So let me come back to this issue of the definition that we've been talking about and wrangling with and struggling with over the past couple of years. One of the main criticisms of this definition has been this issue of intent and how do you define intent. So yesterday we spent some time in tackling this question, and I think I'm pretty pleased that we've come up with a framing which will contextualize this so that it actually keeps the integrity of impact investing intact, because that's what we want to do. This is a global phenomenon, impact investment, and we don't want to dilute it and take away from the tremendous power that it has to really mobilize capital globally. So first, as a group yesterday, we agreed on the end goal. Why are we actually focusing on impact investing? Why do we care about it? We agreed that we want to drive more capital towards solving social problems and creating more inclusive growth. So we were all agreed that that is why we're actually talking about impact investing. That's why it's important. That's why we're in the room today. So with that as an end goal, we agreed that there could be several avenues to actually achieve this. We agreed that intent actually needs to sit with the investor rather than the investee. But there needs to be intent. And it doesn't really matter as much if the entrepreneur has that intent, but the investor, if he or she is mission driven and has that intent, then that's where the power is, and that's where the intent can actually drive a particular business towards very positive social outcomes. Now, some of these investors are going to sit upon a long spectrum. Some are going to be very focused on finding social entrepreneurs that have the latest, greatest new idea. At the end of the day, we know 1 out of every 20 of those will be successful. And there are some impact investors that want to focus on that space and find those people. There are other impact investors who want to find entrepreneurs that actually have successful business models already that are having impact. And they want to invest in those businesses and help them actually achieve even greater positive impact, social impact or environmental impact. So the challenge though is that those investors will have to work with their entrepreneurs to make sure that they stay the course. And that's where the investors can really come into play and really play the role if they're mission-driven investors, if they are truly impact investors. There are benefits to thinking of impact investing from this lens. The benefit is that the burden of proof is on the investor. So we can avoid situations where investors are forcing entrepreneurs who are really good at their particular business model, at producing food stock for a certain community, just really good at something in particular, and investors are coming in and saying, actually, we want you to spend a lot of time reporting on outputs, and we distract them from their core competency. So the benefit of this is that now it's the investor's responsibility to focus on how to measure output and how to support entrepreneurs to achieving that impact. There's a drawback though, and the drawback is actually that the burden of proof is on the investor. It means then that we might have a bit of window dressing. Some impact investors who call themselves impact investors, but actually not really interested in impact, or have their own notions of impact that might not sit with those of us who have a more nuanced sense of really what impact means. What we see is that this is a very nascent sector. And there is a lot of maturation that has to happen in this sector. And so what we hope will happen over time is that we will start to separate the wheat from the chaff. So as we start to develop this sector, as we start to have tools, standards, those people who are really interested in creating impact will stay the course and continue to invest in this sector and find entrepreneurs that are serious about impact and that actually can produce positive outcomes. And those that aren't will eventually fall off and do other things. But it does mean that it does allow for a number of institutions to think about whether an impact investment is a way in which they can pursue certain of their own missions and values as investors. So a few words on the industry potential, because we think it's pretty enormous. When we started to try and build a marketplace for impact investing, people often ask us how big of an opportunity that this actually represented. So we worked with JP Morgan to do a market sizing in order to estimate how much capital could be invested over the next 10 years. This is a difficult exercise because we were doing it from sort of the top down. So in 5 sectors alone, we estimated that up to 10 trillion could be invested with a potential profit of 200 billion, with almost 700 billion over the next decade. So quite a huge sector. So if there is large potential in the market over the next few years, over the next 10 years, where is the industry today? Where is it now? 5 years ago, we started working with Monitor, Carolyn and others, to analyze the emerging industries, and we realized that they often evolve in 4 distinct phases. First, uncoordinated innovation. Second, marketplace building. Third, value capture. And then last, market maturation. So this is how most industries develop over time. So now, after interviewing hundreds of people, we concluded that after decades of innovation, the industry is poised to cross the chasm from uncoordinated innovation to value capture. So we're sitting in that space of marketplace building. And this phase requires both public goods and private-public partnerships for infrastructure building. And this is where philanthropy is very much needed, and that's why we're involved. So what will it take to actually cross that chasm to get to value capture? In 2008, the Rockefeller Foundation board approved an initiative based on 4 strategies. That initiative is called Harnessing the Power of Impact Investing. So the 4 strategies were to help accelerate the industry to get into this area of value capture. The 4 strategies were research policy, infrastructure, building infrastructure, intermediation, and then facilitating leadership development. We've invested quite a bit of resources in research and policy, and hopefully some of you had an opportunity to see some of the reports on our website. And we're also working with grantees in a number of countries in Africa to explore the policy impediments and opportunities for impact investing. Those countries include Ghana, Kenya, Nigeria, Senegal, and South Africa. That research will be complete later this year. So we spent a lot of time trying to understand the dynamics of the sector and understand what the policy implications are. On the building infrastructure side, this has been very key for us because any functioning sector really needs to have infrastructure for it to function. So we have supported a grantee to create something called the IRIS, which is the Impact Reporting Investment Standards. And that's basically a taxonomy for impact investing, so that when impact investors are talking about job creation or electrification, they're all talking about the same thing. So that base language is there. We also supported a grantee to create the Global Impact Investing Rating System, or GEARS. That's another very important piece of this infrastructure. You can think of it like Moody's and Standard & Poor's. It's a way for impact investors to compare and contrast their ability to create impact and compare that across several dimensions. And finally, leadership. We have helped to create a number of legacy institutions that will be in this space long after the Rockefeller Foundation, including the Global Impact Investing Network and the Aspen Network of Development Entrepreneurs. And these are institutions that are very rapidly gaining a lot of credibility in the industry, a lot of stakeholders, and we're very excited that they will be able to continue to drive the mission of impact investing well into the future. Intermediation is where essentially we have, as the Rockefeller Foundation, actually invested directly into impact investors as an investor itself. So we have identified a number of impact investors who really need the kind of seed capital that the Rockefeller Foundation can provide as a philanthropic institution. And we funded, those are just listed 4 there. There are lots of others, including some that are Africa-bred and Africa-born organizations. And they have really also been able to really, after getting funding from us, been able to raise funding from other sources. So being able to catalyze those intermediary financial institutions has been very important because they're the ones that are going to actually push money into the market. So at the beginning of this year, we hired a third-party evaluator to actually evaluate our work over the last 4 years, and to then also assess the evolution of the industry. So there was an opportunity for us to really take a broad picture view of what has happened in impact investing. The evaluation identified a number of areas which there have been key successes. First, investments in collective action platforms like the GIN and ANDI. Second, thought leadership. I think the diverse set of people in this room is really a testament to actually how we've actually been able to help catalyze thought leadership in this space, and mobilizing core allies and champions. At this stage, impact investing has been touted by government officials and business leaders as a key solution to solving a number of key developmental challenges. So we have seen that it's almost reached a bit of a fever pitch. In addition, significant financial resources have been mobilized. Very recently, JP Morgan, again, very focused on this space, we're very happy about that, have with the GIN, the Global Impact Investing Network, actually released a recent report that actually does survey the market and surveys the financial resource mobilization of impact investing. They surveyed 99 investors, ranging from foundations to banks and to fund managers, and found that in 2012, $8 billion have been invested in impact investing. And they think that in 2013, there'll be $9 billion invested. And this represents a very good spread across regions, across sectors, and across return expectations. And importantly also, this capital has come from a diverse range of sources, including banks, family offices, high net worth individuals, pension funds, and foundations. About a third of this investment is expected to land in Africa. So at this stage, a lot of the investment is coming from what we call the global north. Over time, though, that is changing. We're seeing a lot more capital coming from Africa, such as the Tony Aluminum Foundation. But the investors are planning to invest about a third of that capital in Africa. I will say also that Dahlberg did a study for us about 2 years ago where they surveyed West Africa, the impact investing network landscape in West Africa. They surveyed about 200 investors and found that they were committing just over $3 billion in capital for impact enterprises in that region. This just gives you a sense of some of the institutions that are actively involved in this space. And again, I think it's just important to note that you have foundations there as well as huge pension funds that can really drive tens of millions of dollars into this space when they want to. So that span of the types of investors is absolutely critical to the sustainability of impact investing in the future. In addition, our evaluation of the evolving impact investing industry identified the progress that is made in enabling policy and legislation. And this was perhaps the greatest surprise to us because we hadn't really planned this into our work. An enabling policy and regulatory environment can take actually many forms, including those that actually unlock more capital, those that build demand for more capital, and those that actually direct more capital in more impactful ways, so that intermediation stage. You'll see a handful of illustrative policies, but note that we're standing in the home of one of them. Regulation 28 in South Africa has the potential to drive hundreds of millions of dollars from South Africans' pension funds, one of the largest pension systems in the world, towards investment that can have a dual purpose of financial return and positive developmental outcome. And this is a development that I hope will actually transcend beyond South Africa and have implications for the rest of Africa. So we are very excited to see what's happening in South Africa, and we'll help to make sure that the message reverberates across the continent. But as with anything, there are challenges that remain. The first is managing expectations as the field evolves. There are, again, as I said, lots of people who want a lot from impact investing, have a lot of expectations about what it can accomplish, but with all industries, it's slow to mature. And so managing expectations around what impact investing can do is a challenge, and that's something that has to be managed. The second is inadequate data and products for large institutions. If we really want to see impact investing scale, we actually need to have products that very large investors can place very large amounts of money into. And those products are under development right now. They're not there. And then also lack of exit and secondary markets. And that's probably true for all African investments, that we don't have a developed way to actually exit some of these investments. So that's something that's in development. Some of the impact investors now they've been at this for about 7 years now. And so trying to find their exits now, and that's a bit of a struggle, but it's no different from, I think, any other investors in Africa. So I'll focus a little bit on the support for enterprise development, which is one of the main challenges that we have seen. The Gin and JP Morgan report that I mentioned earlier actually surveyed investors and found that 78% of them were invested in growth stage companies, whereas only 18% of these investors were active at the seed stage investor stage. And even before the seed stage, enterprises often require substantial grant funding, such as technical assistance. So this is a real need for the sector. There's something missing there for enterprises that need to get to that first level of funding so that they can actually take an innovation and actually scale it. There is a lack of funding for those institutions. The other challenge that we saw was there was a lack of participation across the regions. The evaluation identified that there was quite a bit of asymmetry between participation and investors in different regions. So you had a lot of money coming from the global north, the US and Europe, and then you had the destination of this capital in the emerging markets. But with increasing wealth being generated in the global south, we see that picture changing, which is why we're actually having these events here. There are investors in Africa, in other parts of the global south, who are actively looking for ways to actually line up their mission with their investments. And so this picture will change, we think, over the next 5 to 10 years. And finally, this is an increasingly global industry. So there are a lot of challenges that remain. We recognize that. But we know that there are a lot of institutions and a lot of individuals who are as passionate as we are about addressing those challenges and really seeing this industry forge ahead. And this just is a picture of a sense of the leaders that are emerging, and it's not an exhaustive list of the leaders that are emerging to catalyze impact investing around the world. We would love to be able to add a lot more logos for Africa. Sorry, Rico, we didn't get your logo there. We should have. But we want to see a lot more institutions that are focused on Africa, who will be the thought leaders and the drivers of impact investing for Africa in the months and years to come. We did a study, a survey, and I think all of you participated in this survey. And we asked you 3 questions. The first question was, what excites you about impact investing? The next was, what keeps you awake at night? And then the next was the most critical barriers to impact investing in Africa. And we actually spent a lot of time digging into this yesterday when we had our workshop. So these are some of the quotes that we pulled out for what excites you. There was a real sense of an ability to leave a legacy. There was a real sense from people that we actually have an opportunity to make a real difference in our daily jobs, in our day-to-day work and what we do. There was also a lot of excitement that there are new business models that are flourishing that could actually attract impact capital and more entrepreneurs who are coming up with these models and successfully bringing them to scale. There was also a sense of excitement that you actually can. There is a great appreciation today that you actually can achieve a market rate return and also achieve a social impact at the same time. That there might be trade-offs, but there need not necessarily be. What keeps you awake at night? Lots of things for people. Lack of patient capital. I talked about the fact that there was very little funding or not enough funding for the seed stage entrepreneurs. There was a concern about performance of the entrepreneurs and the companies themselves, and I guess that would transcend not just impact investment, but other sectors as well. And then there was a real concern on the part of investors, at least, that they are unable to find what we call investment ready, or at least commercially viable enterprises. So that's, it feels like there's a lot of capital out there, but on the other side, it doesn't feel like there are enough businesses who can actually absorb that capital or are ready to absorb that capital. Your preference across 4 different categories: unlocking capital, strengthening demand, assessing impact, and improving the enabling environment, and ask you to basically tell us, what's the most important thing for you, where you sit in the world. And this is what you guys said. Unlocking capital was the biggest issue. So we keep hearing that again and again and again. Strengthening demand was also one of the biggest issues. And we're actually going to address those 2 questions in our panels later today. How do we unlock more capital for impact enterprises? And then how do we actually strengthen the pipeline of impact enterprises? So we will do that as well. But then there was also very, very strong interest in how do you actually assess impact? How can you be sure that your investments are actually achieving the impact that you say they are? It's not enough for investors now to be anecdotal about those returns. They really want to be sure that they are achieving that. And then also improving the enabling environment. And interestingly, yesterday we spent some time talking about the policy environment for impact investment. People think it's a concern, but really don't know what to do about that. So that's a concern, but definitely the first 2, unlocking capital and strengthening demand, are the key things that I think keep people, that are very important to people and actually keep people awake at night as well. Thank you very much.